everyone. My name is Jessica Limbacher, and I'm a staff attorney at Volunteer Lawyers for Justice. I work primarily with our disaster legal response program. So tonight we're going to have a presentation by Stephen Nooner. He's a New Jersey bankruptcy attorney based out of Marlton. He's been practicing for 35 years, and he has 32 years of experience in bankruptcy. He represents people in financial difficulty, creditors, and bankruptcy trustees. And he's certified as a bankruptcy specialist, a business bankruptcy specialist, I'm sorry. So if you'll join me in welcoming Stephen, I'll let him take over from here. Thanks.
Thank you. Today's program is going to cover a lot of ground, but it's basically, as you can see, covers financial empowerment. We're going to cover, first we're going to cover the process of getting a grip on your financial situation. Then we're going to talk about foreclosure, and we're going to talk about bankruptcy. We'll talk about a couple of other subjects. Feel free to ask questions as we need to. The first thing that I deal with when I deal with people in financial difficulty is overcoming panic. People are panicking. They're ignoring the problem that exists. And that's actually the hardest first step. The goal here is to take back control of your life. And to do that, you have to start, avoid denial, which is the hardest step to overcome. And from there, you can start planning. And planning is part of understanding your situation. I find that many people simply don't want to deal with the problems that have come about. Usually that's because of, it could be a foreclosure, loss of a job, health problems, being downsized. Whatever it is, people are in shock. And the last thing they want to do is deal with the reality of that. They don't want to have to make the hard choices. And those choices, there are some hard choices, but at the end of the day, planning lets you take control of the situation. The starting point whenever you do this is a budget. The budget is the first thing you have to do. And a simple question you ask yourself is, how much money do we need to live on? We're talking about the money that you need to keep a roof over your head, keep the cars running, keep everybody fed, keep the lights on, pay for medical insurance. Again, I tell many people that having an operating car is the single most important thing that you own, because if you don't have a car, you can't get to work. If you can't get to work, you don't have any income, and eventually you end up being homeless, and nothing gets worse than that. So a lot of this is being proactive. But when people come to see me, the hardest problem, the biggest problem I have to overcome is this issue of denial. And the way to deal with that is, again, a budget. When I tell people to prepare a budget, and when we do our intake information, the budget's important, I always tell people to apply the Goldilocks principle. That is, you want to try to get your budget, not what you want to spend, but what you need to spend, not too little, not too much. The idea, I tell people, is what will you need to live on for the next 5 years? Now, people say, I have no idea what that is. Well, take a guess. And usually people have some idea of what they spend for say, household goods and the basic household needs. Some expenses are a little tougher to get a hold on because they're irregular. For example, I always tell people, when you factor in your auto expense, you have to factor in tires. I tell people, most people, you need to factor $120 to $150 a year for tires. It's about what they cost to repair, replace, and you have to put that into your budget. There's other expenses like medical care. How much do you spend on medical care? Well, you don't spend the same amount each month. So how much do you spend a year? Figure out what you need to budget for a year and then divide that by 12 and you have a monthly figure. Clothing the same way. Auto repairs, that's another thing. You can come up with a working idea of what it is you need to spend. And it may not be perfect, but at least it gives you a starting point. And I always tell people that whatever this starting point is, you can always adjust it later. A lot of times, the hardest thing for people to get a handle on is what do they really spend at the grocery store, and where does the money go? There's a couple of things I've found where money disappears. People don't know where it goes. I said, well, do you pack a lunch? to go to work, or do you go and buy lunch? Well, if you buy lunch, even if that's $5 a day, that's $25 a week. That really adds up. Cigarettes, again, the fact is cigarettes are very expensive. But the point is, whatever it is, figure out what you need to spend. And don't forget medical insurance. I've had so many people that come to see me and they can't afford medical insurance. They can pay their credit cards, but they can't afford medical insurance. And medical bills are one of the biggest causes of bankruptcy for people. This is what I see. And of course, you want to avoid bankruptcy if you can, but this is one of the biggest problems. So I always tell people, think about getting some kind of medical insurance. Plan it as part of your plan. Even if you can't afford it right now, figure out what that would be. So at the end of the day, what you have is you have a budget. You know, this is how much we need. Maybe it's $4,000 a month. Maybe it's $3,000 a month. Okay. Then the question is, how much money is coming in? And at that point, that's actually pretty easy. What's our net pay? How much is your pay? If you're getting paid bi-weekly, I tell people, multiply your bi-weekly net pay by 26 pays, divide by 12. There's 4 1/3 weeks in a month, so that's part of the calculation also. But anyway, at the end of the day, what you have is you have money in and money that's got to go out. This is without paying anything to credit cards or any other creditors. The key here is that you now know what your situation is, and you know whether you can afford to pay creditors or not. Why is this so important? It's important because until this point, everybody is saying, well, we've got to pay our creditors. We've got to pay our creditors. And they're not looking at why they're not able to pay creditors. And a lot of times, people will run up credit card debt. And how do they do that? They do that because they're not doing this budget. And they're busy using the credit cards to pay for things like food, for auto repairs. And they're not realizing that what they're doing is living off credit, and at some point that gets out of control. So this is, again, the single most important thing to do at the outset when you're facing financial difficulty, is getting a handle on what you have to spend and what you can spend. And that answers a lot of questions. And when I get people saying, well, why can't I simply work something out with our creditors? I'll look at them and say, well, we've looked at your budget and you have $50 a month left to pay creditors. It's not going there. Some people, on the other hand, do have money to pay. And when we work all this out, maybe they have $1,500, $1,000. And at least that way they know what they're dealing with, and we can work from there to figure out what their best option is. Sometimes a Chapter 13 bankruptcy will work. I also tell people that bankruptcy is not something you want to aim for, but it may be something you seriously have to consider. We'll talk about that a little later. The other thing is, what assets are essential? I've had people that they have 3 cars. Why do you need 3 cars? Get rid of the extra car, sell it. It's just a burden. Eliminate the burdens that you can, eliminate your expenses, and that all helps. The next question is, okay, we have some money and we have debts. Which debts are the most important to pay, assuming you can pay them? Well, the car loan is important in most cases because you need to have an operating car if you have a car loan. In some cases, the car loan is simply not affordable, and that's one of the options that we talk about in a bankruptcy context, is giving back the car. Outside of bankruptcy, that's not generally wise. By the way, that's one of the reasons that people get into financial difficulty, is that they didn't do the budget, but they went out and they bought a car, and the salesman sold them a car, and now they have a $500 car payment. If they'd done their budget, they would have known they only have $300 available to pay a car. So now they're right away $200 in the hole each month. And that's how people get into these situations. Of course, there's people who had medical bills, they've lost their jobs. We have a lot of that in Atlantic County, but whatever it is, the point that I want to reiterate is that getting a handle on all this makes things better, not worse. Ignoring the problem doesn't make it better, doesn't let it go away. Of course, utility bills are important, medical care and medical insurance are important, assuming you have this. Mortgage payments, I have people who simply can't afford their mortgage. And sometimes, as we talk about, the best thing in that situation is if you have a choice between putting food on the table and paying for medical care, keeping the car running, or paying the mortgage may be less important. Again, these are part of the tough choices that people have to make. But start of this process for wherever you are is planning, and this is the process of planning. It's the necessary first step. It's also the hardest step for people to take. It really is. Okay, common mistakes that we run into. I have people that take money out of their 401ks or their IRAs. Now, you can do that. You pay a tax hit if you're under 59 and a half, depending on the rules. But you're emptying out money that is for your future support as you retire and as you age. And if you do this, I see people that take this money out and they use it to pay off all their credit cards. But the problem is they haven't solved the underlying problem, which is there's $3,000 a month coming in, and they still have $4,000 they have to pay. So all they've done is basically they've kicked the can down the road. So don't take money out of IRAs or 401ks unless it's absolutely necessary. Not paying income taxes. I can't tell you the number of people who've come in to see me and they've managed to keep it all afloat, but that's because they have a business and they're not paying their income taxes. Uncle Sam doesn't like to be a creditor. He doesn't like to lend money. And Uncle Sam is going to be a creditor who's going to be with you. You can't do anything about taxes. You're going to end up being stuck with them. It's a bad move. People that are desperate in these situations sometimes will go to debt settlement or debt consolidation companies that have high upfront fees. Now, not all debt counselors are bad. There are some good nonprofit organizations. Clarify is one of them. They're a nonprofit that are right here in Atlantic County. But a lot of times they will go to these companies who will promise that they'll settle all their debts and make everything go away. And these are people that if they had done their budget would have known that I have $100 a month left to pay my creditors. But maybe they do, maybe they don't. Whatever the situation is, again, budgeting is important. The other thing that I tell clients is that much of the job, the first job that you have to do is to get the right psychological mindset. I tell people, put on blinders. When you're in financial difficulties, you have to put on blinders. Your blinders are you forget about the past, you forget about the future. The past is over and done with. You've learned from it, but don't dwell on it. Don't dwell on the fact that once you were making six-figure incomes and you had all these toys and now you don't. That doesn't help. The future, if you try to make decisions today based on a future, you're either going to be making a decision based on a future that's worse or better than the reality. Deal with where you are now, and that's the starting point. And that's, again, the approach. The whole point here is that desperation and denial are the worst thing to do in this situation. It's the most important thing to cover. Any questions so far? Okay. Payday, car title loans. People are desperate. And you know, payday loans are very expensive, interest rates of 99%. I've seen people that do that. And that's, again, just another desperation move that's just making things worse. Car title loans. Again, they're getting to be a big thing. You bring in your car title, you give them your car title, and you get a loan at a high interest rate. And of course, you're going to have to pay that back because that car gets you to work. You don't want to lose the car. These are, again, moves that make things worse rather than better. I always tell people, don't play financial whack-a-mole. That's, again, the flip side of the planning. Whack-a-mole is a game, if you've probably seen an arcade game, where up pops a little ball, you take the big hammer and you hit it, and of course one pops up over here. And that's what a lot of people do. They're busy tackling problems piecemeal rather than understanding the whole thing and developing a plan. So planning is the key here. Overemphasizing credit scores. People tell me, what about my credit score? I have this great credit score, or I worked so hard to have a credit score. I've never missed a debt, a bill in my life. Well, that's fine. But your problem right now isn't your credit score. Your problem is financial survival. Well, I want to pay all my debts. I've never been a deadbeat. It's not about being a deadbeat. The problem here and the goal here is to preserve your ability to support your family. I tell people, it's nice to be responsible to your creditors, but your first responsibility is to yourself and to your family. You don't want to be a burden on society. You don't want to be homeless. You don't want to be unable to support and take care of your family. So that when you see that as goal one, it places the credit score in perspective. I'm going to cover this later because there's some surprising things about the impact of bankruptcy on a credit score. Everybody thinks that if you file a bankruptcy that you end up being unable to borrow money or get a decent credit in the future. That's not entirely true. It's a matter of time. And again, the last thing, of course, is not exploring options such as bankruptcy. Now, I'm a bankruptcy lawyer, but I tell people if you can avoid a bankruptcy, that's fine, but you need to look at it as an option. It gives you an idea of, if I do a bankruptcy, this is what will happen, this is this option, and explore the other options. At least this gives you a baseline. It gives you an idea of what I can do with a bankruptcy, and then you can make decisions among all your options. Going in and making decisions without exploring all the choices that you have means you'll probably make bad choices.